First of all, let me just introduce myself. My name is Naila Faroui. I'm the CEO of the Arab Foundations Forum, which is a regional network of philanthropic organizations based in and working around the Arab region. And the panel that I'd like to introduce today is the panel on the role of religion in philanthropy, where we'll be specifically discussing how religion influences an individual's or a foundation's giving, philanthropic or charitable giving. And we have two speakers with us today that I'd like to introduce. And it's my pleasure to introduce them now to you. The first is Dris Alawi Mdaghri, who's a professor, a writer, and artist, as well as an active member of Moroccan civil society. And we also have with us Bishop Matthew Kuka, who's currently the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Sokoto in northwestern Nigeria. So welcome both.
Thank you very much.
So I'm just going to get right into it, and we'll get started. And I just wanted to, first of all, pose a question to the two panelists and let them give us a little bit of a brief overview and to contextualize how religious giving and faith-based giving is structured in each of their regions. And I'm going to ask if you could also please just highlight maybe 2 or 3 of the main challenges that you face, that you face within this structure. And I'll give you about 3 to 5 minutes each if you can, and we'll start with you, Dris, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me. I was a bit hesitating before answering the invitation when you referred to religion and philanthropy as being the topic I should be involved in, as I'm not a theologian, I am a Muslim in my country, and I have been connected with some Islamic organizations, specifically the organization of the Islamic Conference for years, and I have been responsible at different levels of the government and in my country dealing with religious matters. I finally accepted because I feel that nowadays we are living in a period where we need to explain what our religions are and what we do with our religion, our beliefs, and the things we are convinced that are good for man. And I believe that it is absolutely necessary for each citizen, for anyone who has some influence in his region and in his country, to do that kind of explanation. I believe that the challenges we are facing when it comes to philanthropy are numerous, of course, because philanthropy goes for a lot of things. It involves a lot of things. And the traditional ways in Islamic societies, we used to deal with solidarity in our societies was to give because it's commandment of the Quran and the commandment of the Hadith of the Prophet. And by doing so, we gain recognition, we gain a return in the form of going to paradise and being good with, and being in the good with our religion. But this has been traditionally used in a very discreet manner. It's not something that should go in public and be done in front of everybody. It's something which is very intimate, which is very personal. Should it go and become something public and become something organized and structured? One could say that with the zakat, which is one of the forms of this giving and this solidarity principle, with zakat, we have some kind of going into an organized system, because zakat is a duty. It is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, as you might know, and therefore it has been structured, organized in societies in Morocco as in other Muslim countries in a way that it is something that has become quite organized, not in all aspects, but in some ways. Also, another institution that played a role, it is the Habus, Waqf in the Levant, in the Middle Eastern countries, where private or public Waqf and Habus could go for both for private and public giving property in order to have it protected for general interests and working for the general interests. And these forms now are becoming, I wouldn't say obsolete, but they are becoming in question. They are now in question because in this modern life we're living, There are other organizations that appeared, private organizations, whether banks, companies, corporations, and some organizations that do intervene in the field of solidarity and social solidarity. And they raise money for that, and they would certainly like to use the money that is devoted to zakat or sadaqah in order to put it in an organized framework with accountability and transparency. And probably this is one of the first challenges we have to face. How to do that? And is it, maybe before even asking how to do it, is it absolutely necessary to do it? Or should we keep the traditional forms as they are, doing what is done usually through this way, through this channel, and having more awareness within our communities, our religious communities, that maybe by giving to philanthropic organizations and doing philanthropy in a more organized way, in a more transparent way, could also help and fulfill the same objective. That's one challenge. A second challenge that I see, just to put it briefly, is that one of the prescriptions, and there is a verse in the Quran that states it very clearly, what is the zakat for? Who are those who should we should give zakat to? One of the prescriptions is the cause of Allah. When you say the cause of Allah, this is a very general statement. It can be anything. And therefore, some people could understand by saying the cause of Allah, they can do things that are right, but they can also do things that are not that right. And we have witnessed it in some circumstances, for instance, that you would give your money for some organizations that go into some activities that are not that acceptable in the human relations and in the international community. I don't want to be more specific about that, but I'm sure that everybody understands that when you refer to that, in some ways you can say that jihad, which is a concept in Islamic societies and in Islamic religion, but not well understood in my view, might bring some people to give their money to some bad causes. And therefore, we have to be aware of that fact in our community and our region in particular. These are the two main challenges I see for the moment, but I'll elaborate maybe a little bit later.
Okay, great, thank you. And particularly around the accountability and transparency issue, I think I'd like to come back to that towards the end. But Bishop Kuka, if you could also give a little bit of an overview as well about faith-based giving from your point of view, and then just describe a little bit of the challenges that you see in that realm.
Well, let me once again thank you and add my voice to the voices of many of the speakers who have expressed appreciation for this great initiative. But as an African, I worry about being hostages of language. When we talk about philanthropy and whether Africans are capable of understanding or whether really philanthropy exists in Africa, it speaks to the deeper issues that attended reflections about Africa, whether we had a philosophy and so on and so forth. And I think that the truth of the matter is that we have always been given, every society has always been given. How we structure the language is a completely different matter altogether. But I think that we cannot have this discussion unless we also understand some of the limitations in the state structures in Africa. And I speak in particular to my country, Nigeria, where we have perhaps about 400 or 500 different ethnic communities or different ethnic groups with different views and different perspectives about relationships and so on. Within the Christian community, Christianity has changed dramatically. Islam has also changed dramatically in Nigeria. So from the point of view of talking about religion itself, or even religious groups, we need to appreciate the fact that a lot of tensions have been generated. And so when you talk about giving, in Christianity, James says very clearly that faith without good works is dead. So it is in the DNA of Christianity. But again, that's not even peculiar to Christianity. Literally, it should be something that It's in our DNA as human beings. Life itself is a gift. And mothers are given to children, children are given to mothers, and so on. So, as I said, I think we're really talking about structure. For us, in our environment, the real structure has not emerged. And people have always tended to give to communities. In the 50s and the 60s, for example, especially in southern Nigeria, a lot of those who are quote-unquote movers and shakers of the society today benefited from communities pulling resources together, to sponsor them to higher education abroad and so on. But now I think the real challenge is within Christianity. You mentioned the word tithe in your concept note, but if you follow the religious traditions, it is that tithing, as it is so called, is a recent development within Christianity. In the Catholic Church, for example, for over 60, 70 years, we've been involved with a structure called St. Vincent de Paul. And the average Catholic knows about St. Vincent de Paul, where you collect money literally every day. People come to church, and those resources are deployed into dealing with welfare issues. And what we've tried to do is to move slightly outside the Christian community. And I think this is really, for me, the biggest point that we need to address from the point of view of what religion can do, is whether we can find a convergence, even in terms of how these resources are generated. Because if we have a situation where Muslims are collecting only for Muslims and Christians are collecting only for Christians, then we are likely going to end up with deepening disagreements within the community. And I tell you a little story by way of ending. In my diocese, my diocese is about 107 square kilometers, covering 4 states in Nigeria. And Zamfara State, where about in 1999, the governor declared Sharia, which ordinarily should have been one of the most peaceful parts of Nigeria, is perhaps one of the areas in Nigeria where violence has been far more pronounced. And this is not violence visited upon communities by non-Muslims. It is violence within the community itself, although sometimes there are external claims. But I was abroad, and one day I read in the news, I saw on the internet that 47 people had been slaughtered in a community in Zamfara State. And when I got back to Nigeria, the first thing, I never heard of the name of the community, but what I did was I issued a letter to all the parishes in the diocese. And we spent 1 month just collecting money from our people. We were able to raise about ₦1 million, which is the equivalent of, I don't know what it is now, what it would be in dollars. But we sent a message to the community and said, well, we are coming to visit them. And this is a 100% Muslim community in the middle of nowhere. And we got there with 2 trucks full of clothing, food stuff, and so on and so forth. When we got there, it was a wonderful experience because the community received us. And at the end, the leader of the community looked at me. Those who live in Nigeria know that I've been very much in the media for the last 30 or so years. So the old man leans and says to me, he said, I know you. I've never met you, but I know your name, and I hear you on the radio. But how did you know about our community? We are all Muslims. What brought you here? And I looked at him and I said, well, we came here because God's children have suffered a loss. So the point I'm making is that I think we need to start thinking a bit more clearly as believers in how best to structure giving in a way, a manner that enhances the pursuit of the objectives of our common humanity.
Thank you very much. So actually, to follow up on maybe the 3 points that the two of you seem to have brought up in common, first of all, around tensions within different communities, that's one. And the other one around diversity, which I guess is also very much related to the difference between each of the different communities, but then also around accountability and transparency in terms of how we apply them as concepts. So one of the things that we're noticing in the Arab region from the vantage point of our membership is that every time we bring up the issue of transparency and accountability, there's kind of a a step back and people want to say, just hang on a second, this is a very Western taxonomy that you're trying to apply, and it doesn't necessarily culturally contextualize itself within our culture, and particularly around the point that you were making, Dries, earlier around the anonymity of giving in Islam in specific. So, we've been having this question, and I don't mean to simplify it in any way, but the question that we've been asking is how then do we take a concept or the concepts of accountability and transparency, which are sound concepts, and they lend credibility, how do we take them and go from what we call an Allah deductible model to a more tax deductible or a more professional or a more formalized model? So if you could speak a little bit about how do you reconcile this kind of faith-based giving with what is also an attempt to formalize a sector. And again, to your point, even when you're saying how much money we're giving, we don't even know how much money we give. In our region, at least I can speak to that very confidently, that we have a very, very extreme lack of the data in terms of what is the power of philanthropy in the Arab region. So if you could talk a little bit about that, both of you, please.
Yeah, I believe that there are some concepts that are, I would say, universal. Sometimes these concepts come from a long time ago. They're with the humans since the beginnings. Don't kill, don't cheat, don't lie, those things that are principles of living together. Some others have new connotation or they are put in new format. If you take transparency, for instance, and accountability, what do they mean? Basically, they mean things that are there in all societies since the beginning of time. In order to live together peacefully and to do things together, we need to have responsible people. How do we get responsible people who are not accountable? Transparency is something also necessary. Meaning by transparency, not that everything should be there in the open. You cannot have that, otherwise it's, it can't work. Transparency, if understood literally, wouldn't work for certain. But transparency as a set of rules where you can have the reasons and the whys and the hows of what you are doing in the general interest and in a society, that is a must in any society. It's sometimes difficult to understand for some people, especially when they are, in tribal and in traditional societies where things were not structured, were not organized in the ways they are organized today in the modern states. But we have to educate. We have to talk, to explain, and we have to make sure that when we talk about transparency and accountability, we're not talking about something that comes from the Western world and is applied to us. It's something which is ours. It's not something that is or should be imposed to us. If we come with that idea that that's something that comes from a part of the world and has to be applied in other parts of the world, it won't work because people would reject it as something that is not their own thing. While I believe that being accountable and transparent is something very normal and good for any society, as long as we understand what we put in these two concepts and these two terms, which need to be defined very clearly.
Well, I agree, but I do have one follow-up question to that. So if you take or consider a situation, for example, where in some of the countries in the Arab region, for instance, if you are transparent, even remotely so, there are very dire consequences. And particularly within the philanthropic sector, there are a lot of philanthropic entities that are unable to be transparent, not because they're not doing good work and not because they're actually providing money for anything that's bad or terrorist activity, et cetera, but really because there's a very contentious relationship between governments and philanthropy. So is that something that you can speak to in terms of mitigating?
Yeah, I understand this point. And you don't do things in one night, in one day. Things have to be built steadily but surely. And these concepts have to be explained. And I told you that you need to educate people. You educate where? you don't only educate those who are in charge, but you educate those who would be in charge in the future. A lot of education in universities, in school, everywhere where education takes place in order for our youngsters, our people who would become the rulers, the leaders of tomorrow, to understand that they have duties and responsibilities toward their society. That is not a small task. It does take a lot of time, but it's necessary to have a long-term vision and to do that. Secondly, I believe also that we need to train, to have, well, I don't like the word, but it can fit, leaders, good leaders. And there is a verse by Shakespeare which says something which seems to me very interesting. He says, not all can be leaders, nor all leaders can be truly followed. Why could not they be truly followed, those leaders that could be leaders? Because they need ethics. Because you need to have some principles in which you stick in order to have leaders who do their duties, who have the capacities, who have the competencies, but also who do things for the general interest and the good of everybody.
Thank you. Yeah. Bishop Kuka, also, could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the key ways that you feel we can mitigate some of the challenges that you mentioned, that you brought up, particularly around diversity and tension?
Yeah, well, I think I still come back to what I call the tyranny of language. When we talk of transparency, what exactly are we talking about? If we go back to the events that led to the collapse of the world economy in 2008, there were fantastic accountants doing some really wonderful work, but Enron collapsed. And it set in motion a range of other things. So if we talk about transparency in terms of generating paper, I think that is the easy part. I give you an example. I was a parish priest. This is my 40th year as a priest, by the way. And I worked in a parish. It was a relatively poor parish. And I said to them, and they were hearing it for the first time, when I said to them, you need to have an idea about how much money you are collecting on a Sunday. And we bought an exercise, we had a notebook. And every Sunday, at the end, we would put down what we collected. And then the following Sunday, they would read it in the parish bulletin. But my parishioners were the first to resist. And they said, no, we're collecting this money is for God, and you represent God, so we really shouldn't have a problem. And you know the anecdote about this wonderful pastor who said, all the money being collected belongs to God, but I'm representing God. And on a Sunday evening, he goes to the church, and he prays to God and says, look, God, I know this money is for you, and since you live above and I live here on earth, I'll throw the money up. Whatever you catch belongs to you. Whatever comes to the ground belongs to me. So, I don't think you can be more transparent than that. But the point is, when I began to show through data, our parishioners were able to see what they were collecting. It was amazing how much we generated as a result of that. And I make the point because unless we lift the veil of the tyranny of culture, which is dominant in Africa and many developing countries, where should you as a woman know how much your husband is earning? Can a woman really ask her husband how much money is in the bank? I remember giving a sermon about this to a young couple and trying to explain to them how they should be honest and transparent. And at the end of the wedding, my parishioner calls me aside and says, you look so innocent. It's not like that. If we let these women know how much money, because I was trying to encourage my naivety. You husband and wife, you're one, you should have one bank account. And my friend says to me, your wife will walk up to you on a Monday morning and say, hello, honey, you love my earrings? And you say, yes. And then you go to the bank on Tuesday and find that the money is gone. So it is that if we talk about transparency in an environment where the people themselves feel very comfortable because power has been there's a myth that has been created around power. So I think that for me, there are certain projects that should validate and make up for accountability. If, for example, you have put money together for the sinking of a borehole, or for the construction of a road, or for the building of a community health center, and so on. Those things, in the eyes of the community, should validate any other claim you may make about transparency. But I think that by and large, in my view, this should be work in progress. But within the context of our environments in Africa, the greatest difficulty is that our own people, due to lack of education and due to the tyranny of culture, which the politicians thrive upon, it's a long journey. And I think we should also not be worried about committing huge resources to educating our people. That's why I was talking to my friend from Nigeria who is dealing with the issue of budget. That even at my own level, I am frightened of budgets because I can't look at the figures. I don't understand what they're talking about. But I think once we begin to get our people into talking about these things, part of the conversation will, of course, be when people have a chance to express themselves. I remember, and I end on this note, a local government chairman who decided that it would be nice for ordinary people just to know what is going on in their accounts. No, it was a women's group. And when they went, they will look at the budget of the local government, and they'll discover that there is an amount of money committed to a title called miscellaneous. And it kept reoccurring and reoccurring in the budget. And this old woman looks, and at the end of the meeting, she says, look, what is this? Who is this miscellaneous? She couldn't pronounce the word. Who was miscellaneous? Because he was receiving a salary and nobody seemed to know what his address was. So I think that even from the voices of ordinary people, if we engage people in this conversation, they will come up with an idea of what they understand and what transparency means. But if you are going to think of transparency from the point of view of generating the best letterhead, paper from the best accounting firm, it will just be one way of solving the problem, but the difficulties will remain.
So this is something actually that you're both bringing up for me that's very interesting. You both use you've used the term tyranny of language, the tyranny of culture. You're using this idea of imposition and the imposition of certain constructs from one, and the need for education. You both bring up this idea of the need for education. And I'm interested to ask if you could also just elaborate a little bit about what are actionable, actual ways that you can start to change mindsets, and particularly around philanthropy and religious giving and the constructs for that, and how these can affect the relationship between philanthropy and the public, philanthropy and the formal sector and the private sector and the public sector, so that there is a little bit more cohesiveness and less of this sort of contentious relationship. Because all the words that you're using these are fighting words. So I'm just curious to know how do you see the actions that can be taken to relieve some of those tensions?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I believe in the individual's responsibility. And each of us has to be some kind of role model for others, and also have role models from others. We give and take. I was discussing with a young Moroccan artist yesterday. I receive in my own house a lot of youngsters who come. We create things together. We do plenty of things together. They come from unfavored parts of the city of Casablanca, in particular, where I live. And we do create artistic works together. And one of them asked me, why do you do that with us? And I was a little bit surprised. I said, well, I do it because I like to do it. I do it because I feel it's my duty to do it. I do it because I have pleasure in gathering people and doing things with them. I do it because I like sharing. I don't need any particular reason more than that. If we try to develop this spirit in our minds and share it with the youngsters in particular, this might help create a network of people who would do the same. And I felt that these youngsters who come to visit me, they also start doing the same thing in the places where they live. And now there are, maybe I started with a group of 5 or 6. Now there are tens of them who would come, do things together, and not asking why they do them. They do them because that's something they should do for the others and with the others. We have to develop that kind of spirit and that kind of motivation. The no motivation. We do it because we are humans, we share, it is our duty, it is our responsibility, and we should gain joy and happiness by doing so. That is not maybe something that in this material world we live in our particular time, that's not something that is obvious to all, because people are very often concentrated on what is the profit, where is the profit, what is the interest of doing this. We have to learn and convey a message, and I believe that those who are in such positions as to be influential in their context should do that more than others. Thanks to God, I have some social capital in Morocco, and I have decided, since I retired from my duties with the government, I have decided that this social capital, I would put it at the service and at the disposal of young people. We lately started a program called Prodige, didactical project for youngsters. In French, it's Prodige, Projet Didactique pour les Jeunes, which consists I have an organization, I share an organization called La Fondation des Cultures du Monde, and we signed a convention, an agreement with the University of Casablanca in order to train 100 to 150 each year of youngsters and try to identify talents there who would have some future in artistic activities. I'm not saying that, meaning by that this is perfect or good. What I am saying is that when you have had the chance to gather and to capitalize in your society things that could help others, put them at the service of others. The more we are, the more this helps. I believe very strongly, and I finish with that point, in the individual responsibility. We in our community, in Muslim countries in particular, but this is the case also in some other countries, we believe mainly that it is the state or the institutions that could do things. Maybe they do things sometimes good, sometimes not that good, but that's another matter. What I believe in as being the key factor of development is the individual undertakings. Do things. Do them for others. Try whatever you have been gifted with, to put it at the service of your community and of your friends, your family, those who are around you. And maybe you would come with something which is very useful. And maybe that's even more, has a stronger impact than some philanthropic organizations and not of.
Okay, thank you. Bishop Kuka?
Well, I think I'll again come back to the question of language. I think as long as we hold on to this word philanthropy, and I'm not saying it should be off, but we must be careful that we don't create the impression that philanthropy is something that big people do or rich people do. If we take that position, first of all, two things will happen. One is that we will be legitimizing inequalities. Two, it will make it very difficult for us to question the kind of structural distortion in the African states that make it so easy and possible for a single individual to make $1 million, 10 million, $20 billion by just one telephone call or just one signature. The state in Africa is the domain of privilege, also the domain of exploitation, and the domain through which the elites are making money. But I think we must also be careful that, Napoleon said it is religion that stops the poor from killing the rich. We must be careful that philanthropy does not make the mistake that religion made when it became the opium of the people. and that we must not dull our people's capacity for self-expression and self-development by creating the illusion that somehow, like somebody mentioned about Robin Hood, we can rob the rich, to feed the poor. I make the point because I think that in many of our countries and many of our communities, our people showed, before the state became so convoluted, our people showed in the 50s and the 60s that they had capacity for organization across every level. Now the state in Africa has stopped serving the interests of the people. And I think our conversation must include a critical intervention or interrogation of those distortions. Because, as I said, there is an African saying, it says, the hand that gives is always on top of the hand that receives. And there is no need for us to create a dubious sense of nobility around receiving. Because I live in northern Nigeria, and I meet a lot of my Muslim friends, and I get on very well with them. I am pro-chancellor of 2 universities in Nigeria, one owned by a Muslim, 2 in a state where the governor is a Muslim. Perhaps they recognize me, but I appreciate that. My challenge is that that goodwill needs to trigger right down to the bottom. It doesn't happen to be so. Right now, Nigeria is contributing minimum about, if you calculate the number of street children that are on the streets of Africa, Nigeria is probably contributing about 70 or 80%. Because in northern Nigeria alone, there are 13 to 15 million kids who are on the streets and out of school. And in the name of quote-unquote religion, they are going around the streets begging. And the way the Muslim beggar begs, let me use that word, the Muslim, because, the 2 words are interchangeable. The way those kids beg is they say, may God give you so that you can give me. Meaning that these individuals have outsourced their own responsibility. And in African politics, we vote and hope that the politicians will enjoy on our behalf. So I think that if we, as to use the word that has been used here severally, if we scale it, then it is possible for our people, that is, if we break down the vocabulary in a way and manner that people don't see philanthropy as something that big people, big politicians, big people in the churches do, then they will appreciate the fact that the critical question is, what are we giving? It is evident that wealth is only one gift. But sometimes it is possible to be rich and also be wanting in something else. If you have all the money in the world and you don't have children, not because of lack of trying, it has consequences. And perhaps you need somebody to counsel you. He's giving you a gift that you cannot buy with money. So I think we need to disaggregate the language in a way and manner that people don't feel intimidated or threatened. And that this is a castle that has been built, and it can only be inhabited by the rich and the mighty. So I think that there is a lot in Africa, and that state building and building our communities must work pari passu with the contribution of ordinary people, no matter what their status may be in life. Because in traditional societies, when I was growing up, if a man lost his son, or first 2 sons, or whatever, the community went and undertook to help him on his farm. If there was a widow, the community organized to help her on her farm. So if we don't, as you used to use the expression in Nigeria, when Nigerians don't like to talk about corruption, the bureaucrats, they say monetize it. Now, if you monetize giving, then it means that you are not able to value the contribution of those who don't have the resources, but they are rich in other ways. So, and I think that going forward, the only way we can create an environment in which people have a sense of belonging, where human dignity is extolled, is an environment in which people don't feel incapacitated because they don't have the capacity to give. Because within the Pentecostal Christianity that has emerged right across Africa, Pentecostalism, which preaches the prosperity gospel, has assumed that if you are poor, then you are under the curse of God. And if you are rich, how you get your money is not the issue. And once we begin to celebrate wealth, prosperity, in an environment where increasingly people are grinding in poverty, that distortion of the message of God, in my view, doesn't do justice both to faith itself and to our people.
Right. Thank you very much. Um, so we're at the 15 and a half minute mark. So I want to open up the floor to questions and comments. So please just raise your hand. I'll call on you. And then if you can, just stand up and very quickly introduce yourself and ask your question. And let us know if it's directed at any specific panelist, please. Right there.
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel discussion. My name is Eddie Manju with Yale University. My question is to your last point, Reverend, around the prosperity gospel. We're seeing an increase of Pentecostalism around Africa, many churches that are essentially preying on some of the very poor people to give money to the church. You have increasingly large number of millionaire pastors. Is that, to be African is to be generous? Is that kind of gospel kind of eroding our own cultural fabric and ability to give to each other?
Well, I think being a Catholic, perhaps if I talk about Pentecostalism, people might misread me. But I'm happy I have quite a good number of Pentecostal pastors who are my friends. But it's a troubling situation. And actually, the poor people are the least of my worry. But if you are in a dysfunctional environment such as Nigeria, where extreme poverty, misery, is living side by side with stupendous, unaccountable wealth, then people must aspire to be something else. I mean, there is no poor man who wants to remain poor, and there is no rich man who wants to come back to poverty. There's an African saying that the stick you use to beat poverty, don't keep it so far away in case poverty comes back. I think that because the Pentecostal gospel, which has fed on the corruption of the Nigerian state, the corruption of the political elite, the corruption of the individuals who have recycled their corruption and their sense of banditry into the system, has created a situation in which the Pentecostal pastors are simply taking from the poor, from the rich, unquestionably, with the notion that this is God's blessing. So you have a religion that has become largely transactional. And so the pastor encourages, if you put 10 naira, you're going to get 10,000 and so on. But the real concern, in my view, is with the poor. But again, as I said, if you have a situation where you don't know how to treat yourself, and you don't have the resources for your wife to have a baby in a hospital, and you also don't know what is the cause of malaria, and you don't know what is the cause of X, Y, Z, and so naturally, you will move over to external forces. And if somebody promises that they can heal you, and they can cure you, and they can teach you how to become a rich person, that kind of environment is seductive. And for me, the response is to say, the state project must continue. A certain kind of confidence being built into ordinary people to be able to participate in the affairs of their own life. So for us in the church, we are also as criminally involved as other actors. And that is why I'll be more than happy to see, beginning with myself or any of us, standing in the dock to answer questions for the kind of stupendous wealth that people are flaunting. Where people believe that I'm seeing pastors receiving as birthday gifts Lamborghini cars. I'm seeing as pastors receiving as birthday gifts aeroplanes and so on. But I want to end by simply saying, if you go back to the internet, I believe, are you a Nigerian? Huh? Kenya? Okay, well, not too bad. I mean, I went to Kenya. I'm sorry, I went to Kenya. Let me tell you this, it's a beautiful story. I went to Kenya 10 years ago, and they refused to give me a visa at the airport on the grounds that I was a priest. And one of the immigration officers told me very frankly, the reason why the Kenyan government was having problems with me as a Nigerian was that the Nigerian pastors are taking over all the church business in Kenya. So I understand. We're not doing badly. I mean, we've taken over Ghana and a lot of other countries. I mean, but as I said, it's a worrying trend. It's a worrying trend.
Thank you. Is there any other question or any other comment? Please, yes.
I think My name is Almaz Negash. I am with the African Diaspora Network. Religion has a big role to play in terms of engaging society. And in the Catholic religion, social justice is key to doing good in the community. You said something that was very interesting to me in that the philanthropy, as is used right now, is actually really truly divisive in some ways, because the poor thinks it's really a place only for the rich. But I want to share something that in the United States, there is a wonderful paper that was just published a year ago on diversity in philanthropy. Philanthropy actually happens in the United States, especially in the African American community, every Sunday. People give. And so that money in itself has not been counted in terms of philanthropy, because it's really based on family. So the giving in the African American, or even as the Africans from the diaspora, the contemporary diaspora, we give, except that it's not very well known, because we're not doing it in an institution that is said philanthropy. But actually, philanthropy happens every Sunday, and it has a purpose, and it makes a big difference. But at the same time, I'm just going back to that value that's being diminished, because so many ministers became very, very rich out of it. So it created mistrust. So how do we close that gap and then create a little bit of a trust back into the religion we belong to, or the religion that we want to be a part of somehow? Thank you.
I think all you need to do, the poster man for that is Pope Francis. I think that even for me as a Catholic priest, Pope Francis has completely changed the way we have seen religion and its role in society. A friend of mine celebrated his priestly ordination anniversary, and he had said to me that he needed a new phone. And I decided to buy him a phone. It cost me about 3,000 naira, which is really not the kind of phone you can use. It was the cheapest I could find in the market. And I sent it to him. The next day he calls me. He said, "What kind of nonsense is it? How could you send me? You are a bishop, and this is the kind of phone you can send to me?" And I said, "No, I sent you something that Pope Francis will be happy with." But the point I'm making is that I think we are beginning to see very clearly that religion is meant to have a much more noble role than we are presently trying to, And I think this is a conversation that we need to have, and we must continue trying to have. My worry with church giving as it is in its present shape and form is that, almost like ethnic giving or community giving, it's a bit incestuous. It says that people are sending money to family or sending money to churches, and luckily, as I said, I'm in Sokoto. Sokoto is, as I said, 92% Muslim. But I'm happy because every day I'm trying and I'm struggling through education to create a much more inclusive society. And for me, it's very interesting that, let me sound immodest, that I get a lot of Muslims come to me, and they're traveling from the length and breadth of northern Nigeria. And they're saying to me, "We just want to talk to you." And I said, "About what?" They tell me their stories, and I said, "But, why are you coming to me?" And they tell me, "Well, we are coming to you because we know you can listen to us." The point I'm making is, and I think that if religion must play a more noble role, it is as Jesus said in the Bible, "I have come so that you may have life and have it to the full." And on Judgment Day, all of us as Christians believe. That's what the gospel says. Jesus will say, "You are going to heaven because I was hungry, I was sick, I was in prison. You gave me to eat, you gave me to drink, you visited me." Nobody says Jesus never said whether you were black or white, male or female, rich or poor. So I think that there has to be an element of surprise. And for me, that's why I made the point about going to that Muslim community. And when I got there, the governor had never been there. The local government chairman had not been there. The emir had not been there. In fact, when I went, it was on the day we went there that the emir decided to follow me. So the point I'm making is, for me, especially given the nature of the divisions and the fault lines in our communities, we need to find a way of demystifying religion and making it a means of building institutions and structures that encourage and enhance our common humanity.
Can we get one in the back over there, please? And then Ndidi here on the right.
Thank you very much. My name is Julius Riongo from Kenya. And I'm sorry, Reverend, that you are denied a visa. I'm sure you can come back and that will be okay now. Because you have many Kenyans who have also made churches their profession. But let me commend the two speakers for talking about this particular subject, which I think is very emotive in terms of giving. But Reverend, you remember that in the Bible, when the rich man went to see Jesus and said, "What do I do to inherit the kingdom of God?" He was told, "Go and sell all you have and give to the poor." It means that Jesus recognized that the rich have a responsibility to assist the poor. And therefore, when you say that that must be demystified, I'm wondering, from the religious perspective, it is the poor, it's the rich who are supposed to support the poor. The next thing I would like to consider is that I was a beneficiary of education which was brought by the missionaries when they came to our country. They established schools and hospitals. And that was through giving from where they came from. And I'm sure when I think the government started taking over the schools and the hospitals, it appears like our country, as if the Christians have now decided they probably have done enough. But I still believe there's room for more to be done because the governments cannot support everything. And I think Christians have got a role to be able to contribute again, like the old missionaries who are doing, to establish more institutions to help the people of the countries they come from. Can you please comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, I'm more than happy to listen to Ghanaians, Kenyans, Ugandans, because we can beat them in football. So I'm no longer worried about it. No, to answer your question, yes, what you're talking about is Mark chapter 10, the beautiful story. But remember, when Jesus told the young man to go sell everything, the next line tells us that the young man was very sad. Okay? And it is the only incident in the Bible that we are told Jesus saw this young man and loved him. But remember that later on, Luke tells the story of Lazarus and Dives. At the end, it is Dives is begging Lazarus, okay, who was a poor man here. Dives was having to rely on Lazarus to go and help talk to his family so that they wouldn't end up in this place. Now, the issue, we can quibble with the Bible, but I think really the critical question is for us to have the honesty to think as Christians about not necessarily lifting up the text from the Bible, but there is enough in the gospel. There's also enough in our cultures. We didn't have to rely on the Holy Quran. Before the Holy Quran, before the Islam came to Africa or Christianity came to Africa, our people were not necessarily, what the colonial projected us to be. So I think, as I said, it's for us to have a bit of honesty, to focus more on our common humanity, as opposed to focusing and paying too much attention on our diverse religious identity. Otherwise, religion will do for us what ethnicity has done for us, which is to help us destroy our society and our communities.
I think we have time for one more question. So there's one here and one there. Yeah, Didi?
Sorry, yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to just mention that everywhere we've had breakfast as part of APF, this issue of religion and philanthropy has come up, and that's why we put it as such an important topic. And I still want to push to Dr. Driss and Bishop, can't we put in place policies or advocate for churches and mosques to present their financials? Because so much money is pouring into this sector. And in other parts of the world, they recognize religious giving, and it allows us to hold our people in positions of authority accountable for how that money is used to serve the poor. Will it be too difficult, and is that something we can advocate for? Thank you.
Well, I believe that definitely we should advocate for that. It's something that is normal in our times, and it is absolutely necessary to see where the money comes from and where it goes. Not only because that's something which is normal in everyday life, but also because there are some crucial issues that are linked to that. Is the money used effectively? Is it used for good reasons? It is used for good causes? And also, is it used in bad ways? How could we do that? How could we achieve this? Is not very easy, I must confess. It will take time because not everybody wants to see the channels through which they go being publicized. Not everybody wants to have every detail of what he gives and every detail of what he does known by the others for plenty of different reasons. But we have to keep working on that. How the state should play its role. We are living in countries where there are institutions and there should be laws governing our countries in all aspects of their lives. And I believe that we have, at least in my country, started doing that. Now it's progressing. Not everything is completely covered by the text. Some things could go through this, the number of texts that are taken, the laws and the decrees and so on, but that's something which is done more and more. We should live in states of law, states where law governs. That's something which we need to have. But saying this, let me maybe come out a little bit of the scope and develop one idea which is very important in my view. There are a lot of advisors and counsels coming from different parts of the world for countries such as Morocco and probably for some countries, other countries, African countries, saying you should regulate your country this way or this other, you should have this institution or this other, you should do things appropriately to democracy or to legal, the rule of the law. But at the same time, we live in a world, a global world, where the law is not applied equally, and the law is not the same for everybody. Let's take one simple example. As we are talking about solidarity and talking about injustice and these kind of things. The migrant situation. Why should there be any visas in the world? That's a question I have been asking myself for years. Why should be any visa? Should there be any visa? If equality and justice and law for everybody should be applied, it should be also applied at the international level. So you can't have two languages at the same time, do these things rightly, accordingly to the rule of justice and law, and don't apply it on the international arena. And that's one point I wanted to stress at this stage.
I want to be conscious of the time, so I'm actually I'm going to end the session now, but we have networking time later, so you can always find either one of the panelists to ask your follow-up questions. So we can just go on to the next session so that we don't take up their time. So we're just going to ask that you please remain seated for the next panel, which is on philanthropic investment in arts and culture. And please note that this session will be partially conducted in French. And thank you all very much for your time. Thank you to the two panelists for your comments.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.